So last week we started with chapter 1. So this course is like ongoing. I'm going to be, as I like to say, teaching this course till the rapture comes. You say, oh, you're hedging your bets. Well, I think we're getting awful close myself. Others disagree, but and of course, some people don't even think there is a rapture, or they think it's going to be, who knows where in the timetable. But so the official position of Assembly of God is that it happens at the beginning of the tribulation, and I believe that's also accurate. But if you feel differently, that's fine. Hopefully, I'm going to present options and what these things can and might mean. And if I don't say it, if I say something that sounds maybe a little dogmatic, just take it as that's my opinion. So my opinion, and how much is it now for Starbucks? $10. My opinion, and $10 will get you a cup of coffee. I don't know what. I don't know. I gave up. We gave up Starbucks. We make our own. We grind it and make our own stuff now. I can't afford. I'd be broke going to Starbucks. Anyway, so we are in chapter 1. We managed to get through several verses down to verse 8 last time. And again, this is just to encapsulate what we talked about. This is the vision of Jesus given to John. He actually was taken and saw these things, wrote it down, and we believe he had a guy, an amanuensis, copy it down for him as he dictated. But he was on Patmos, which is Alcatraz of the day. If there's the emperor had a guy he really wanted to marginalize. He said, all right, Patmos, the guy's going to Patmos. And, that meant there's no escape from Patmos. So eventually John did get released, but that's a different historical matter. I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation, kingdom, and perseverance that are in Jesus, was on the Isle of Patmos because of the word of God and my testimony about Jesus. So he's on that island. There's rumors, I don't know, it's recorded that they tried to boil John in a vat of oil, and they couldn't kill him. And so I guess they got afraid of him then. And so the emperor must have said to himself, well, maybe this other god has a little power. So I'll tell you what, I won't try to kill the guy anymore. Let's just throw him on an island. Nobody will ever hear from him again. Whatever he writes, nobody will ever read again. Of course, it's his is the last book and the bestseller of all time. So it shows what the emperor knew at that time. Domitian is his name. On the Lord's Day, I was in the Spirit. Most people take that as meaning Sunday, the Lord's resurrection day. And I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. Keep in mind that in a few chapters, chapter 4:1, John is taken to heaven in what I consider to a raptured state. He was raptured to heaven, if you will, by the sound of a trumpet. And that's not our direct topic, but you'll see in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4 where the main rapture passages are, that both cases the church is taken to heaven by the sound of a trumpet. So you might say, oh, you're stretching it. I don't think so, but that's my opinion. Verse 11, saying, write on a scroll. Keep in mind, they didn't have books back then. I know we like to think, everything back then was like it is today. John had his digital phone, and he was putting it all in there. It is so primitive. It's hard for us to imagine how primitive compared to today that world was. Some of these old movies do a pretty good job. So as he's going along and he's watching these things, Jesus says, okay, write it in a book, a scroll. We call it a book today. What you see, and send it to the 7 churches. Okay, at that time, John was on this little Alcatraz island of Patmos, and he was directly off of the coast of what we call Turkey. They called it Asia Minor. All 7 of these churches are right off that island. In other words, if you just went straight to the land from that island, you'd come to the first church, and then you'd make a circuit around the other 6 churches. So the 7 of them actually kind of it wasn't a true circle, but we'll call it a semi, or not a sort of a circle that it made. Okay, it was considered to be one Roman road. There's one Roman road that went all around and brought you back to your first church of Ephesus. Yeah, that's true. Except there's no city in the middle. We usually think there's a city in the middle, but it is like that. So Ephesus is probably the biggest city in the area. Smyrna, all these had either, if not at this time, at some point, significance in ancient empires or Roman Empire. Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. So we're going to read further about those in chapter 2 and 3. Verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me. See, we have no time frame here. It's like I'm kind of caught up in this vision, and a voice is talking to me. You think immediately, I'm going to see who that is, right? So there's no time frame here, so we don't know if he immediately turned around, if there was a waiting time. But we're going to continue on. Probably since he's in the infinite dimension, time's kind of irrelevant anyway. Again, he wasn't on Earth. I think it's fair to say his body was on Earth, right? So, but somehow we don't know the mechanics of it. We can't even really understand it. He was taken probably in his spirit to heaven. If his body went there, I wouldn't argue with anybody, but I'm not sure that happened. Then I turned to see the voice who was speaking with me. Having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. Okay. And those lampstands are going to be explained in chapter 2 and 3. Most things, if not all, in the book of Revelation are either explained in the verse context, in that pericope, that passage we're dealing with, or in the chapter, or somewhere in the book, or in the most more obtuse case, somewhere in the Old Testament prophets. But the idea that some symbol or concept in Revelation can't be understood is really not accurate. You might disagree with the interpretation, but everything, somebody said that Revelation is if you're from New York, you understand, Grand Central Station of prophecy. All the Old Testament prophets all came to one central location where all the trains arrive, right? Grand Central Station. The book of Revelation is Grand Central Station. And we're going to see that each church has a lampstand. Okay, just to illustrate what I was talking about a minute ago. Again, in modern day country boundary, this is all Turkey today. It's kind of interesting that the heart of the Gentile Christian church, where it was Christian for hundreds and hundreds of years, was eventually taken over by the Muslims after Muhammad came on the scene in the 600s. And so now, today, and ever since that time when they conquered the land, they've been Muslim. So Turkey today is Muslim, and their flag has a crescent and a star, which is a symbol of Islam. So far, fortunately, they haven't been too radical. But that's, again, put it in perspective today, Turkey's a member of NATO. NATO is the European power group. So they're the only Muslim nation in NATO. Some scholars have projected, I think is accurate, that they're going to leave NATO. And eventually we're going to see them align with pure Islam. So, but that's an aside. That's a rabbit trail, right, honey? I hear about it when we go home. You went on a rabbit trail. Where? I have no idea. What are you talking about? Anyway, so but you can see where all these countries are. Patmos is off the shore, and then they're definitely not in a circle, but they're in a circuit. They were all tied together. Verse 13, and among the lampstands was one like the Son of Man. So this is a case like I was referring to. If you had some question about what is this expression, Son of Man, then you can find it, since it's in the Old Testament prophets, Daniel primarily. He's dressed in a long robe with a golden sash around his chest. That's like priestly garments. The hair of his head was white like wool. Okay. I mean, I think, most of us, if we see wool, it's been heavily processed. We're not that familiar, unless you raise sheep, I guess, with what wool looks like. But apparently the raw wool they dealt with was very white. So what does the whitest snow represent? Anybody? What do you think the whitest? Purity. Um, I think, at least in the past, maybe not today, but white hair in the previous societies meant somebody was more elderly, which means mature, experienced, to be looked up to, and especially in the Asian culture. So it meant somebody that was seasoned, experienced, knew what he's talking about. His feet, his eyes were like blazing fire. Don't forget that. Okay, so I've seen some artist depictions, with like fire shooting out of his eyes. I don't know that he has fire shooting out of his eyes. That sounds a little bit more like one of these superhero movies to me. But I think it's a matter of his eyes, the intensity of his eyes are just, the only thing he could say is that it looked like blazing fire. And you're going to see that a lot. Here's a first century man. Again, it's hard for us to even understand what the first century was like, the amount of poverty, the lack that they had, the cultural experience they had, everything else. So we're taking a first century man, and he's seen things that no one has ever seen before. Keep in mind, John was the youngest, and John was the favorite, and John walked the earth with him for 3.5 years. But then, after Jesus ascended, John did not see him again for 65 years. This is the first time he's seen him in 65 years. 65 years. Oh, well, I'm thinking 65 years ago, what was I doing? Oh, that's right. I was just a baby. I remember now. Ha, ha, ha. Okay. I was not a baby. No. It's hard for me to remember everything that was happening then, but I was a young person. But I mean, it's just hard, I don't normally think about 65 years ago. So here's a guy who walked with Jesus, and Jesus left the earth. And of course, he had the Holy Spirit, and, John had written the gospel, and now he's having this experience. But the world he knew was a world that's unlike anything that he was about to see. And what he's about to see is not only spiritual things, but he's going to see battles and modern warfare concepts that he could only relate back to us in terms that he knew. So when the Old Testament or in John's talking about, oh, they had horses and shields and swords. Personally, I don't think modern warfare is going to be fighting in that parlance. I mean, that's not the language of modern warfare, but he did his best to explain what it was. So he describes a sound as most powerful he had ever experienced. His feet were like polished bronze. I think that means super bright, but like glowing, right? And it's like they're in a furnace. His voice was like the roar of many waters, and that's where we get this sound thing. So again, John is thinking to himself, where have I heard a sound like this? Because no man has ever heard this sound before. When Jesus was on the earth, he didn't look like this, and he did not make these sounds. In other words, it's only when he ascended, remember on the Mount of Olives, like for 40 days, he was on the earth. And it's interesting. He started out with a 40-day period. He ended with a 40-day period. And then he went up from the Mount of Olives with the two angels, and that's it. But he didn't look like this. They didn't see him like this. When he appeared to Mary and Peter and John and the rest of them, he didn't look like this because he had not yet ascended and permanently resided in the heavens in his ultimate form. In other words, so this form that he's describing now is how Jesus looks now and will always look. Jesus is not coming back to earth in the sense of looking like he did when he left, right? His power and his might and all of his attributes will be with him. When he was on the earth, he was limited. God limited himself, Paul says, to take on the form of a man. So the guy, the person, the personality that the apostles walked with was just a limited or small reflection of God. He was totally God, but he, for his purposes, had limited himself. But when he went back to heaven and took on his complete role as the Son, that was gone. He's never going to look like that again. He's going to have the scars, and we're going to see him. But what John's seeing here is what he really looks like. He held in his right hand 7 stars, and a double-edged sword came from his mouth. So the double-edged sword, you can think about maybe Hebrews 4:12. The word of God is sharper than any double-edged sword. So it's like the word proceeds from his mouth, and it's like the super weapon. It is kind of like these movies. He's like the ultimate superhero, but not in that vein. So he has all this power. It's not a matter that Spidey things are shooting out of his wrist. He's the whole package. He makes these guys that they concoct in their imagination look like little kindergarten kids. I mean, he's got all power and all ability and all knowing and all seeing. So we're seeing Jesus for the first time, in a sense, since the Gospels, the portrait of the Gospels, all true and accurate, was not his full and complete power being shown. Can anybody think of one time where in the Gospels his complete power was shown to the apostles? Most people don't think about it. It's on the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John were up there, and Jesus appeared in his full glory. So John had seen him in his glory one time before, but I don't know that he actually totally realized what he was looking at, which is evidenced by the fact that they said, "Hey, let's put some tents up here. Well, we'll camp out up here. You guys can stay with us." Duh, he didn't get what was happening there. He was just getting a glimpse of the real Jesus in the second coming. So we see now that he had this light in his face that was radiating exponentially. That's all in other words, you cannot measure it. It's just greater and greater and greater, and he was perceiving this. So we see in verse 17 that when I saw him, John says, I fell at his feet like a dead man. You'll probably remember in various portions of Scripture when the flesh, the mortal, encounters a supernatural, maybe you don't like that word, heavenly being, entity, whether it's just an angel. I should say just an angel, but compared to God, an angel is just a created being. So if it was encountering an angel, or I just lost my place. Okay, there we are again. And so what we have is the fact that when flesh encounters the infinite, the finite encounters the infinite, the finite is overloaded. That's the best way that I can put it. It's kind of like I don't know. I used to study electronics a little bit, but you could all if you plug a certain electronic device in and the power is too much coming through it, it will burn it up, right? I'm trying to think of an example. I think I've done that a few times, but or if a component's weak. So as soon as you plug it in, they say that the main time light bulbs burn out is when you flip the switch. That initial surge is so much it burns them out. So the initial power coming out of Jesus, and John's standing there, he fell like a dead man. So you can then say, oh, he must have had a body then. It's a debatable point. Was it just in his spiritual body, or is he there in his mortal body? The context doesn't really tell us, so however you'd like to receive that, but he did fall like a dead man, like so many others in the Scripture. When the spirit contacts flesh, there is a reaction. Sometimes we call it falling down in the spirit in Pentecostal circles. Verse 18, the living one. I was dead, and behold, now I am alive forever. This is really pertinent because which of the apostles was the only one to see Jesus die? There's only one that saw Jesus die. John. Remember, Mary and Mary, his mother, were there, and John was watching the whole thing, and that's when he said, "Here's your mother," and gave, Virgin Mary to John to take care of. But so here's a guy that when he says, "I was dead, and behold, I am now alive forever," it wasn't just kind of some kind of little comment that sounds good. He's telling John, "You saw me die, and now you see me like this. Now maybe you're getting it. You're going to get it now once you see what I'm about to show you." In other words, he was going to see the whole picture. What did it really mean? What really happened back then, 65 years ago? Therefore, write down the things you have seen and the things that are and the things that will happen after this. This is the key verse in Revelation to unlock what the revelation is about. So what we're going to find out is the things, write down the things you have seen. Well, that's up to this point in verse 19. So what are the things he's seen? He's seen the risen, glorified Christ, and he's seen the lampstand. So everything that he had seen in chapter 1 at this point, write down. So that was the moment. It was in the infinite sphere, but still it was in the moment. And then he's going to say this, and we'll see this in chapter 2 and 3. And the things that are. So the things that are, that means the things that are occurring in the world now in your historical reality. In other words, not 10 years ago, not 10 years in the future, but what is now. And so the things that are now are those 7 churches in Turkey, on the subcontinent of Asia Minor. So those are now. So the things you've seen is what you're looking at right now. We're next coming up, they didn't have chapters, but coming up next, coming attractions, we're going to have you see in chapter 2 and 3 the things that exist over there on the continent from away from Patmos, which, by the way, he was very familiar with because he was the head of the church of Ephesus. After Paul left and Timothy passed on, John was the eldest and the only living apostle, and he was the head of all the churches, particularly Ephesus. He resided at Ephesus, and he watched over all the other 6 churches in that circuit. So he's very, very familiar with everything that the Lord's about to talk about. So the key to interpreting a revelation is 3 things. The things that are, we're looking at, the things that, things you've seen, the things which are the 7 churches in chapter 2 and 3, and then everything after those churches past chapter 2 and past chapter 3. From chapter 4 onward, those are all future events. And the things that will happen after this. In other words, this being what's happening to him right now. But he's saying, I'm going to show you the future. So those are the 3 divisions of the book of Revelation. And if you miss that, it's possible that you may misinterpret a lot of the book. So it's not all the same. They're happening in different spheres of time. This is the mystery of the 7 stars. Like I said, the Revelation explains itself if you keep reading, usually. You saw on my right hand and 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars of the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So now, if this was a substitution problem in a word processor, every time we see lampstands, we can substitute a church. Every time we see star, we can substitute an angel. But it's not as definitive as I would like. Greek was a very precise language, and I study it pretty much every day. It's kind of my thing in seminary. But basically, the messenger is an angel. In the Greek, it's angelos. And of course, when you anglicize it, when you take that and make angelos Greek into the English word, we have the word angel. So that's all it means. And then you have to go back in the Greek and say, well, what does that mean? I mean, it had many secular or military meanings, but the main meaning was that I'm thinking of Mel Gibson movie I saw. It's called Galapagos. I don't know if anybody saw that, real old, but anyway, it kind of evidences this. They were pinned down, and the Axis powers were, I mean, the Germans were coming against them, and the Turks, and they had to get a message to their commander far away. So they had to pick a guy to take the message and run that message all the way. You know, the odds of the guy making it there were pretty slim. So it was a great movie. But anyway, but that's exactly what messenger meant in the original, like in the Roman Greek times. It's like it's a message, a commander, an emperor, whoever it was, dignitary, would write on a scroll, and the message, right? That's the message, and then they'd roll it up, and then some of these old movies show this. They drip wax on it, and then each of these guys had a signet ring. That meant it was really for me, right? Whoever it is, the emperor. So they stamp it, and and then the messenger was told, go and take it to so and so in such a city. So that's what messenger means. It's someone bringing news. Oh, by the way, if they dared open that message, the penalty was death. You're saying, oh, they probably just snuck it open, saw what was in it. No, it's not Agatha Christie. They didn't steam it and open it up. Let's see. If I do that, I die. Should I do that or not? Nope, don't want to do it. So that was a serious deal. But in this case, it just means messenger. So who is the sender of the messenger, and who is the recipient of the messenger? In this case, who's the sender? God, Jesus, right? You know, it's infinitely. They're all three are one. So if you say one, you say the other, right? So yeah, so the angel, of course, they're not like people. They're not going to try to open the message. That's demonstrated. We'll see in a couple chapters where it's like, here we got this scroll and it's sealed. Who wants to open it? You know, and not one of those guys wants to open it, right? Who is worthy? And they're all, you know, you can see them. I don't know. They're all going, I don't know. Maybe Gabriel, you want to take a shot at, you know, Michael, let's take a shot. No, they all go, no, I'm not touching that baby. Who is worthy? And Jesus steps forth. So, but that's the idea. It was sealed, and it was meant for one person. Only that person could open that up. So what we have here is these messages are being sent by the messengers, which would be the actual messenger would have been someone that John gave the message, the scroll to, and it was sent to Ephesus and then circulated around there. But there's been debate about what the angel of the seven churches, each church has an angel, what that means. Some people think it meant the pastor of the church. Some people think, expositors believe it, that each church had an angel, an actual, you know, heavenly angel over them. It's not as clear as I would like, but however you like to interpret that. There's one problem with the first interpretation of being the pastor, because there were no pastors over churches at this time. That's us trying to think like today back then. Ephesus was probably the biggest church outside of Rome. John was I don't think they called him a bishop, but in effect, he was like a bishop over all this. And so, but Ephesus had no church building. There were no church buildings till about, 313 plus. 300 years, there were no church buildings. Somebody said, I'm going to church. And you go, oh, which church you going to? The one down there located on Ephesus Way and Roman Imperium Way? No, not that. It was a conglomeration of homes. They all met in the homes. And I can't think of the exact verse, but it's Paul's going to Ephesus on his final journey, and he calls for all the elders, plural, from Ephesus. Each church had a leader, and there was no guy over all of it, except for John. But it wasn't so much that he was a bishop like we think about it today. He was simply the eldest and living apostle. He was in a category by himself. He was a superstar beyond superstars at that time. But at any rate, so if the angel was to be interpreted as the pastor of the church in Ephesus, there was no such thing except for John, if you want to look at it that way. So was John going to send a letter to himself? No, of course not. So, that's a little problem there. Although you could say the seven stars, the angels, the seven churches interpreted that each of the home churches had a leader. I'm not going to debate that. It's kind of a hard one to figure out. But the key is to realize that what we think of as a church today is not what it was back then. Not that they didn't want a nice church, but the Romans would come and destroy it and kill them all. So, hey, we're getting engaged in a building project. How long do you think we're all going to live after that? The Roman procurator would say, oh, they're building a church in the middle of the Roman town. Let's go get them, boys. Let's round up a posse. That wasn't going to happen. There was no way that was going to happen. So they had to meet in secret. Unfortunately, for 300 years, that's the way it was. Although I have to say this, maybe fortunately, the church was never stronger than when they met in the homes and were underground. Who's the strongest church today, probably in the world? China.
Because they still need the homes.
Well, yeah, the homes give reality to Christian life, but really it's because the persecution cuts the wheat from the chaff. And when it really costs that much to be a Christian, there are no fake Christians. But it's not to say we shouldn't appreciate what we have. I'm sure they'd rather have what we have than go through what they're going through, if you know what I mean. But anyway, so that's just an aside. Okay, so I have overgone, well, it's not too bad. Gone over by 5 minutes. And so now we'll have an ending prayer. Anybody wants to stay around and ask questions? Otherwise, you're free to go. Honey, will you close this with prayer?